I've always helped a little bit in some educational role, but right now I'm working with the SIN 360. I help co-develop their new zygomatic and pterygoid implants. A fairly large portion of my practice is focused on remote anchorage techniques.
So for the new guys that are probably a GP office, probably adding full arch recently, and probably got themselves into a position that probably scaring them, they're freaking out and they're going, man, what did I get myself into?
I don't even know if I want to say that it's a mistake. It's more of just the growing pains of them trying to figure it out. They're just trying to figure out all aspects, the marketing side, how many appointments is this really going to take? These treatment planning, when the patients come in, can they efficiently treatment plan the case?
Welcome back to another episode of the Full Arch Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Gary Bird. I'm the founder of SMC National, where we help you create, convert, and close more full arch cases so you can grow the way that you want. And today I have Dr. Christopher Barrett, who's coming on, and he's going to blow your mind because he's going to share some unique perspectives. He grew a practice to 6 locations, which he sold, and then now he's a traveling dentist helping other doctors place full arch, and he is going to break down the 3 different kinds of offices out there. The offices that are just getting started and their weaknesses, the offices that are averaging 3 to 5 cases a month and what they have to work on. And then he talks about the people who are absolutely crushing it, doing over 10 arches a month, and what we can learn from them. This is very, very unique. Great episode. Dr. Chris does a great job. You're going to want to stay tuned for this one. We are live with Dr. Chris, and I'm excited to have this conversation with him today because he has a very interesting background, a little bit different than most doctors out there that are doing full arch. And let's start with this. Could you share a little bit, Dr. Chris, with me about how you built up your 6 practices and sold those? You've probably noticed this before, but this podcast is unsponsored. What that means is we don't get paid to do it, but we want to bring you the best information possible. So how do we make sure that this content stays on the air? We need you to like and subscribe. Wherever you're at, whatever you're listening on, just give us a thumbs up or subscribe, and that helps us out so much. I know that you probably haven't done it, so I'm just going to sit here and wait until you do. 95% of our listeners have not subscribed to our podcast. So go ahead and do it now. Don't make this awkward. All right, good. Back to the show.
Yeah, a little bit of background with that. I had joined an all implant practice that Dr. Justin Moody had started up in Rapid City, South Dakota, and then transitioned down to Arizona. And when I did that, I opened an office with a private equity group. And then helped that grow to a number of offices before I left my office, and then kind of sold my portion back to them. So that was pretty interesting as far as getting into that world and kind of looking behind the curtain and seeing what those guys wanted to get out of it just as much as the docs that wanted to join wanted to get out of it.
What was one of the main things that you learned from that experience?
One of the big things was when we started that, it was the interest rates were different, the economy was different, and so patient financing and patients' ability to get money cheaply was significantly different than it is today. So as far as capital layout, as far as converting, acquiring, and paying for new patients as a direct-to-consumer type of model, looked a lot different. So something that I think, docs moving forward that I know either have general practices that want to get more into full arch, I would tell them to keep that part of their office and not exclusively transition over. I think it's just a healthier thing to do. You're not so much, live by the arch, die by the arch type of months.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it can be difficult, especially a lot of people that are in full arch now. They haven't lived through a major recession, and when major recessions hit, it definitely changes the amount of people who are doing larger treatment. And that doesn't mean you can't be successful. It just means that the top people usually do well, and the middle kind of shrinks and the bottom really, really struggle. So you sold your practice, you sold it to the private equity group.
Yeah, that sold my portion back to those guys.
Yeah. And so what is your thoughts on private equity and dental in general, just from your experience?
Yeah, my experience is an N of 1. So I think a lot of people look at it as maybe they have the answers. And I think a lot of times people are just all trying to figure out what to do as far as all of the same questions, that no matter if you're trying to grow your practice and you're a single office, or if you're trying to do some sort of, DSO style or DPO style or something, I think everybody's just trying to figure out what the best way is to do that and how to do it efficiently and effectively.
Agreed. They are. Do you have any opinion on who does a better job of figuring that out? Right, because it's kind of like I'll share the way I view the kind of the market right now, because it's kind of changed over the years. So when I first got into dental, I only worked with single practices, and all the single practice owners told me never talk to a DSO. They are literally the devil and the worst thing in the world. And I was like, wow, that's okay. That I guess that's the way that it is. And then over time, I kind of learned that, oh, no. There's DSOs that are doing things that probably aren't the best. And there's some great DSOs that are, doing some really cool stuff. And then over time, all of my clients started adding locations and they all became groups. And I was like, wait a second, I thought you guys were all against these DSOs. And they were like, well, we are, but we aren't. You know what I mean? It's complicated, right? And then I was like, okay, so that caused me to dig a little deeper. But then now what I'm kind of seeing, it's not so much about the single practice versus the DSO anymore. It's kind of like private money versus private equity. And again, it's the same story. It's like there's great people out there that are doing great things, and there's bad people that are doing bad things out there on each side. I think where it gets a little bit muddy is when you get into private equity, into healthcare, it does shift the focus, right? So like if I ever talk to a dentist that is trying to grow a group, they're always patient focused, like always, without a doubt. They're always like, hey, I want to put the patient first. What's best for the patient? And sometimes when people who are focused on growth, which I'm all for growth, I love growth. I do podcasts about growth. But when you're solely focused on growth, it can misalign of what the patient's going, what the experience that the patient's going to get. And that's where I see the horror stories coming from. What are your thoughts on that? What's your view? I guess would be a better question.
Well, I think when you take money from someone and then or it's either your job to make them money or pay them back, I think that shifts some of the focus from some of the patient care. It is what it is. It's the incentive of it. So if that incentive is put over on a certain spot, people are going to work towards that. I think there's been because of how the economy has changed and interest rates and the cost of money, I think there's been a huge focus more on efficiency and maximizing what you have versus, hey, we're just going to go gangbusters on growth. So instead of adding, more and more locations, why don't we make the locations that we have, as profitable as possible? It's interesting. And I'm coming at this from, I'm neither for nor against. It's not my job to tell people, how to practice. Yeah. And, I went to the DICOMA meeting in Denver this year, and that was my first one. And, the top CEOs of the biggest DSOs were all there. And they basically told you like, hey, this is what we're doing. And we're going to do it the best that we can. And if you want to try to outdo us, go ahead. But here's our game plan. And a lot of it was focused on building the right culture, acquiring docs, and then making sure that the docs feel value. So, regardless of what it's been in the past, which I don't know since I'm a relatively young doc, it's the same thing. It's the horror stories, and it's, hey, if you're with them, then you're against dentistry. But I think over time, as dentists learn, as some of the things that become available to the DSOs as far as different types of the industry, whether it's lending or financing or AI, as that trickles down or people get to the point where like, oh, hey, I can do this too. It's not like there's some sort of secret sauce on the other side. I think you'll see more and more docs kind of join forces.
Like how? What do you mean by that, join forces? Like in groups or in different ways?
Yeah, in groups, or that it's not so scary to have multiple locations as a single doc type of thing.
Yep. So you sold. So relatively speaking, you had a good experience. So you went into a partnership, you sold it, you moved on from your 6 locations that you helped build up. They bought back their that from you, and then now, can you tell us what you're doing now around with Full Arch?
Yeah, I've always helped a little bit in some educational role, whether or not it's with other implant companies. But right now, I'm working with the implant company called SIN 360. They were recently purchased by, SIN Global was recently purchased by Henry Schein. So now they own BioHorizons, SIN, and KiemLog. I helped co-develop their new zygomatic and pterygoid implants. So a fairly large portion of my practice is focused on remote anchorage techniques. There's a number of offices in town that might be doing, I go to probably 5 offices routinely here in the Phoenix Valley, and then have gotten some other state licenses to go and help out at some offices around. But whether or not it's just a general all-on-4 practice that they have some cases that they feel like that they can't handle, or if I need to just come in and help them with a more difficult case, that's kind of what my practice has turned into. And then just trying to kind of figure out my next move, whether or not I want to acquire an office, start one, keep the traveling gig going, something along those lines.
Would you be okay if I take this in the direction of what you're seeing in these offices as they try to grow their full arch? Because that's what I imagine you're working on, right? So you work with like a spectrum of offices. Maybe they do a ton of arches, or maybe this is they're on their second or third arch. Is that right?
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about that spectrum. So for we'll start at the bottom and then work up. So for the new guys, the guys that are, probably a GP office, probably adding full arch recently, and probably got themselves into a position that is probably scaring them. Let's just be honest, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So they're freaking out and they're going, man, what did I get myself into? And so they reach out to you. What are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing that they're making when it comes to full arch?
And I don't even know if I want to say that it's a mistake. It's more of just the growing pains of them trying to figure it out. So I feel like my job a little bit is to help those points of friction, just smooth those out a little bit. For example, a lot of times when docs are trying to get into full arch, one of the ways that they'll do it is that they will lower the fees so that they can get more people to join. So, which isn't a bad thing to do. I gave away a lot of treatment when I was trying to figure this stuff out, in the sense that I needed to get more reps to be more efficient, so I could be more confident, so I could educate patients on how I can deliver these cases for them. And so they're just kind of at that point. So it's just it's terribly inefficient at this point when they first start. They don't have their processes down. They may or may not have a relationship with a lab. So they're trying to figure that piece out. I have a photogrammetry unit that I'll take to offices if they don't have that, so that we can basically just do a digital workflow, because most offices will have an intraoral scanner. So they're just trying to figure out all aspects. They're trying to figure out the marketing side. They're trying to figure out, hey, how many appointments is this really going to take? These treatment planning, when the patients come in, can they efficiently treatment plan the case? That's kind of where they're at. They're just at that beginning phase, just going through each. There's kind of like these pillars that I think you've talked about on some of your other shows. They're just trying to basically just get the building blocks of each one of those pillars.
What would you say if they could add, what's the common theme that you see where they're at, that if they can figure this out, it would really help them?
If they could figure out how to confidently talk to patients about their options. And so many times the patients come in and then they'll ask me hey, can we do this case? Can we not? Is it a good case to do? Just because they haven't seen it enough. And that's really that first touch point of instilling that confidence in the patient to make sure that you're going to give them the outcome that they're seeking to use the professional to provide. Yeah, I would say that's kind of that number one first stumbling block. Yeah.
Communication. And that communication is probably going to be really helpful, not only to the patient, but also to their team, because that's really the glue on both sides, right? Is the doctor is the common denominator in the middle of the team being successful and the patient being successful in their treatment. So that communication would go both ways. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And so then it's where did that doc get their training? And, when I first started out, I felt like there wasn't really any good continuums, or just kind of like you were saying, when you started out, it was, totally different than it is today. There's more and more courses being offered now in a comprehensive way, but there's different levels of training, and you're never going to get it, just from one course. So this was just a lifelong journey of adding to your tools, adding to your tools, adding to your tools.
And I think that's one of the biggest differences about full arch, that if I could drill into people's heads, is that it's not like adding other services that you've added to your practice before, where you go and take a course. You're like, oh, I get it. You know what I mean? I understand it clinically. And then you go back to your team and you're like, hey guys, we're going to try this out. We're going to do some. And then you there's some rough spots, but you smooth them out really quickly and the patients aren't mad. Everybody's happy. And you kind of do them and you can build it a little bit. You throw some marketing on top of it and everything kind of works. Full arch is not that way at all. Like it is not even, it's not. And I think that's the deceptive part about full arch is that, well, I've added these other things and they all went smoothly. And so why not just add this? And this is going to go smoothly. And it's like, no, it will absolutely beat you up, spit you out. I was actually talking to a rep recently. I'm not going to say their names because I don't want to throw them under the bus. I talked to several different folks at some of these implant companies. And basically what's happening is a lot of these GP offices, they come in, they go, okay, I'm ready to do full arch. They buy the kit and they get their first patient or two. And then they end up calling Dr. Chris and saying, bail me out. And then they never buy implants again. You know what I mean? They never buy the kits for full arch again. And it's like, well, what happened to him? And these reps are trying to figure it out. Like, what happened to this customer? Why aren't you buying more? And it's like, they were scared to death. Like they were put into a really bad spot and it wasn't fun. It wasn't exciting. And so they stopped. And I'm of the opinion this is happening like 90% of the time with a lot of these offices that they just get stuck there and they never talk about it. They never share it with anybody because it's embarrassing, right? Like it is.
You don't want to tell your failure to launch story. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but it puts them in a weird spot, right? Because maybe they would be able to do it if they had all the information because they're smart people, right? We're not dealing with dummies. It just, they weren't given all the information up front. They were only given bits and pieces of it, bits of the clinical, very little of the operational, none of the marketing or sales, and you end up in a weird spot. And that's, I mean, literally the reason that we have these conversations. So I love that feedback that you're giving for that, doctor. Now, I would love to talk about that second tier. So we'll get to like the 10 and over guys that are consistently doing those that you work with. But that middle ground where these guys are probably doing 2 to maybe 5 arches would be a big month for them. Walk me through why they're calling you and what's going on there.
Yeah, those offices call me if there's just like a problem because they're kind of built for that amount of volume. And if they're still doing their GP stuff, then there was something that happened or they need help with the case or they're just not sure. So that's kind of where they're at. And they're just a little bit further along than the people that are just starting. But they have a little bit more of a routine. The team, just like you're saying, is a little bit more aligned now. They're getting a little bit more comfortable talking about certain sizes of cases and money. You know, they're not stumbling through it. They're like, okay, we've done this a number of times. We've got our little process down.
So when you say there's problems, what do you mean by problems? Like they just don't have enough time to do it? Like it's a big month?
Maybe an implant didn't integrate and now like their AP spread is not that great. And hey, I need to come over and just put in some other implants or just something along those lines. But they're looking to me more as a resource to help them in situations as opposed to bringing me in to
so they're calling you for information. They're saying, hey, what should I do in this situation?
Yeah, they're using me. One of the biggest things I think everybody needs is a mentor. And I had some awesome mentors on my journey. So if people reach out to me, if they have got issues with cases, I can't turn them down because it's my paying back to the people that really helped me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So they're reaching out. You're walking them through those cases. They're probably a little less panicked, these folks, right? Because they've kind of been here before. Is that right? Or is there still some worry?
It depends on the case. Sometimes a little bit of panic. Sometimes it's like, hey, I know I've been here. It's not that big a deal. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So there's probably less panic overall, but yeah, case dependent. And is there anything that you're seeing? Is there any common denominators of these guys, this second tier that you're seeing as you work with them? I know you're not as hands-on because you're not going into the office, but is there anything that you see with them, either on a positive or a negative side, that if they started doing more of this or they started doing less of this, they would be more successful?
I think they just they don't have the ability to revise their own cases yet. So as you start off and you get into, let's say, like basic all-in-X or all-in-4 type of treatment, most of those cases, you've typically gone through, let's say, a sinus course, and you can do a little bit of sinus grafting. You might add that into some of your cases. So let's say you haven't gone and done any sort of remote anchorage type of training yet. So zygomatic or pterygoid or other types of implants. And so what happens is you get X amount of cases under your belt that can fit within a certain style of treatment. For the docs out there that know some of this stuff, there's something called a Bedrosian classification, and you're going to classify what type of all-on-X treatment this patient can fall into based off of the remaining bone that they have. And, or that's the gist of it. And so they're swimming in basically the shallow end of this stuff. And some of these cases, all of a sudden they're wading into the deep end and they don't realize it yet. So either halfway through the case, it happens, or a couple of their implants don't take for whatever reason, and now they need to be able to swim in that deep end, and they don't have the tools for it yet. So they just don't have the ability to revise their own cases yet. These would be the docs that, 80, 90% of the time it's fine, but then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I got to call the oral surgeon, or, hey, I got to send this case. And that's when there may or may not be friction there. Some specialists teach other docs how to do this. They're like, hey, do your own thing. I'll help you out. No problem. Other docs are like, hey, you shouldn't be doing any of these cases. As the specialist should be doing it, type of thing. And I'm not a specialist. I'm a general dentist. But so that's that office there.
And then what's the gap, like in your experience that you've seen, or maybe even you can speak to it personally? What's the gap from, hey, I'm a GP and I'm adding full arch, I'm doing my first case, and then I'm to stage 2 where I'm starting to be able to do full arch pretty confidently, but I'm still not able to revise my cases yet? Like, what's that time frame for most people, would you say, or for yourself?
That was a significant period of time for me, because I didn't feel like remote anchorage was like a thing. It definitely was a thing, but it was not on my radar because of the world that I was living in at the time. I was fortunate enough to take Dan Holtzclaw's, I think his very first pterygoid course. And if you don't know who that is, that's someone that, should probably be on your podcast. But awesome. Down in Dallas. And I mean, there were some big names down there. Mike Picos was at that course. It was kind of like a who's who of some of the implant dentistry that was going on. And that just opened up a whole new world of techniques to treat patients. When I was practicing, or still am practicing in Arizona, there was 10 different guys within a stone's throw of my office that would say, hey, I can give you teeth in a day. So if you didn't have the ability to either revise your own cases or take on the more difficult cases, and you're going to sit there and tell a patient, hey, you might have to be in a denture for 4 to 6 months, they're just going to go down the street and someone else is going to treat them and give them, teeth that day or the next day, type of thing. So for myself, it was a little bit of a longer road, just because I felt like I kind of started prior to some of the more.
That totally makes sense. What would you say, like if you were starting now, what would be a good timetable for somebody to aim for at those steps?
Part of it is going to be how many reps you're getting at your office, or whether or not you're traveling or going to different offices, or you're part of a DSO or a clinic. So if you can get, 50 to 100 arches that are, let's say, relatively normal, or, starter cases, or just kind of regular type cases, before you get into that would be really helpful, just because you pick up all these little things every time you do a case. And then the things that really helped me were going to cadaver courses and live surgery courses. So I would filter in, I would do a case, and I would line up cases in between these courses. So I would go to a cadaver course, I'd have patients lined up so I could use those techniques right when I got back. Then I might go do a live surgery course and then do some of those techniques right when I got back, and then filtering that in. And I probably did 2 or 3 cadaver courses and 2 or 3 live surgery courses that really helped me.
That's awesome. Okay. So how are we doing on time? Because I know we started this episode a little bit later because of me. I messed up.
No, we're good. Yeah.
Are you good? Okay. So Let's talk about the guys that are doing 10 or more arches. So these are the guys that are much more experienced. They've figured out, obviously, the operational side of things. They've also figured out marketing to some extent and sales to some extent, because they're predictably producing 10 arches a month. That means their schedule's dialed in. They got specialized team members that are helping on the ops and sales side and marketing side. So if at all, are you bumping into these guys and helping them as well? And if so, what are you seeing there?
Yes. So these offices, usually I just go in for exzygomatic cases. So these guys are just doing all their own cases. And then if something comes up and they're like, hey, can you come in and help with these cases? It's for a different reason. So let's say tier 2 was, hey, I need a revision, or I need help, or I'm not sure what to do. These guys are like, hey, we do, 90% of our own cases, but because we do enough volume, we've got these really atrophic cases that come in. We don't do them a lot. We haven't had that training, something along those lines, and then I'll come in and do those. So most of the time, these offices have their own lab. They might have multiple locations, or just one larger one. But that's that level.
And what are you seeing in these practices? What's the common denominator with these guys that they are successful the way that they are being?
They're solely focused on full arch. So these guys have moved on from, there was some period of time of general dentistry or some other. Now they might market, one of the things when I was with that previous group that was kind of interesting was a lot of these offices will still have denture in their name. And it's because if you kind of select out, that group, some patients don't realize that the difference between a removable denture and a fixed denture, or it's all the same to them. And most dentists don't understand full arch. So to have patients try to understand full arch, so crazy. You still might have to market to a certain group, but these guys are solely focused on fixed full arch.
That's so good. Really, really good. This is really good stuff. If someone wants to reach out to you and learn more about what you're doing or connect with you as a mentor, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Probably Instagram. That's Chris Barrett, 2 R's, 2 T's, DDS.
Awesome. Say that one more time and we'll drop the link down below.
Yeah, it's at Chris, CHRIS, Barrett, BARRETT, DDS.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on. This was really good. This was an exciting episode because we got to talk in a way that I don't normally get to talk about this stuff. So this is a really unique perspective, and I loved how you were able to break down all sides of it. So wonderful job.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Gary. Appreciate it.